The sky over Earth had never seemed so empty. It wasn't the absence of stars that made it feel that way. It was the silence. Humanity had been watching, waiting, perhaps even hoping for something beyond the stars. But when the Zakar arrived, the silence wasn't a peaceful one. It was the eerie stillness before the storm. In the sprawling metropolis of New York City, the familiar hum of life continued until it didn't. The news came first, a report flashing on every screen. Strange ships had entered Earth's atmosphere. At first, people thought it was some kind of high-tech PR stunt, a marketing campaign maybe, or a promotional film. But the air went cold when the reality set in. The ships were not landing. They were descending. On the outskirts of the city, Sarah Lynn watched the events unfold from the safety of her apartment window. Sarah wasn't a soldier, a diplomat, or a scientist. She was a programmer, a simple tech genius who had always thought the world's problems were more about software than survival. But when Earth's unprepared military launched its first attempts to fight off the invaders and failed miserably, Sarah realized how wrong she had been. The Zakar were real, and they weren't here to talk. The first wave of attacks came from above, massive orbital bombardments that shattered the skyline and crushed the foundations of cities. Earth systems, from power grids to satellite communications, went dark. Governments scrambled, their leaders unsure whether to negotiate or prepare for complete annihilation. But for Sarah, the realization was simpler and more terrifying. Earth was defenseless. Not everyone shared that view. Across the world, military forces rallied to fight back, but their weapons were useless against the Zakar's technologically advanced weaponry. Earth's military stood no chance against the might of the invaders who, with their towering silver-skinned warriors and sleek ships, seemed an unstoppable force. But Sarah wasn't alone in her thinking. Across the world, resistance fighters began to organize not just to defend, but to strike back. Among them was Colonel David Roth, a seasoned military strategist. Roth had served in countless campaigns, but never had he faced anything like this. The first time they encountered the Zakar on the ground, they were crushed in minutes. Earth's forces fought valiantly, but they were outclassed, outgunned, and outmaneuvered at every turn. Back in her apartment, Sarah was poring over a stack of old data from a forgotten project, a relic of humanity's past, an abandoned research initiative aimed at reverse engineering an ancient alien technology. It had been a dead-end project, dismissed by most as a conspiracy theory. Yet something about the way the data had been hidden made Sarah suspicious. It wasn't just outdated, it was suppressed. And that was when she saw it. A pattern in the data, an energy signature, a frequency that didn't belong to Earth. She sat back, her heart racing as the realization hit her. The Zakar weren't the only alien race to visit Earth. They weren't even the first. But Earth's hidden history didn't matter if they couldn't fight back. Sarah's discovery didn't go unnoticed. She had spent weeks studying the fragments of alien technology that were buried beneath Earth's surface. She wasn't the only one aware of this ancient tech. Colonel Roth had caught wind of it too. They reached out to her. Though she had no idea how he knew of her, she didn't ask. When Earth was teetering on the brink of destruction, there was no room for questions, only answers. A crackly transmission came through her comms device, a voice crackling with urgency. "Lynn, it's Roth. We need you. Now." Sarah didn't need any more prodding. She gathered the data she'd uncovered and made her way to the underground military facility where Roth and a handful of other scientists were already waiting. By the time she arrived, the situation had only worsened. The Zakar were close now, too close. Their fleet hovered over Earth like a giant dark cloud, and Earth's remaining defenses were scattered, with most cities already abandoned or in ruins. "We've got one shot at this," Roth said grimly, his eyes not meeting Sarah's as he stared at the maps on the walls. "We use what you found in those archives. We hit them where it hurts." Sarah hesitated. The tech was barely understood, unpredictable at best. The Zakar could turn Earth into a glowing crater at the flick of a switch. The plan Roth was suggesting was reckless, and yet it was their only hope. "We need to gather more data. Sarah muttered, her fingers dancing over the console, calling up more readings from the alien tech. We don't fully understand how this stuff works, Colonel. It's dangerous. We don't have time for caution anymore, Roth countered. We either use it or we die. The tension was unbearable. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to reconcile her fear with the urgency of the moment. She had spent her life solving problems with Kadi, with algorithms. But this wasn't a problem that could be solved with logic. This was survival. In the shadows of that underground facility, amidst military-grade tech and the hum of battle readiness, Sarah felt a surge of dread, but also something else. Determination. Her fingers were trembling, but she didn't stop. If there was a way to stop the Zacher, this was it. It had to be. You realize what we're doing, right? She asked Roth, her voice barely above a whisper. If we activate this tech, we might not just drive them off. We might set off something we can't control. Roth gave her a look that said everything. They had no choice. She glanced at the others in the room. Scientists, soldiers, engineers. All of them were looking to her for answers. The weight of it felt suffocating, but she took a deep breath, steeling herself. We need to get to the primary energy core, Sarah finally said. The one we uncovered 2 months ago. If we can reroute the power, we might be able to overload their ships. As Roth and his team geared up, Sarah's mind raced through every scenario, each one worse than the last. What if the tech malfunctioned? What if the power was too great? The very thought of humanity unleashing such power left a bitter taste in her mouth. But as Roth's words echoed in her mind, we either use it or we die, she knew there was no turning back. The plan was set into motion. Sarah and Roth led the charge to infiltrate the Zachar's command center. They navigated the ruins of Earth's capital, past streets that were once alive with the pulse of human existence, now a desolate wasteland. The alien ships loomed overhead like a judgment waiting to be passed, and then there it was, the primary energy core. The ancient tech pulsed faintly in the distance, buried beneath layers of rock and metal. It was a relic from a forgotten time, an energy source so powerful it could shift the balance of power in the galaxy. Sarah took one last look at Roth. His expression was grim but determined. We're not just fighting for Earth anymore, Roth said quietly. We're fighting for everything humanity could be, and then they activated it. The ground beneath them shook and the sky above crackled with a sudden terrifying energy. The Zacher fleet began to move in a synchronized pattern, unaware of what was coming next. And with a single thunderous strike, the world watched in awe as humanity's answer rang out across the stars. The first bombardment hit at dawn, a flash brighter than the sun, a deafening roar that split the air and rattled the foundations of Earth. Across the globe, people awoke to chaos. The ground shook as if the planet itself were being torn apart. Massive ships hovering high above the clouds unleashed their fury. Plumes of energy beams slashed through the atmosphere like the claws of a beast, decimating cities with a precision so alien, so impossibly perfect, that it was impossible to grasp the scale of the destruction until it was too late. Sarah Lynn had barely managed to leave her apartment when the first blast hit the heart of New York City. Her feet barely touched the pavement before a shockwave sent her tumbling, her ears ringing with the sound of collapsing buildings, the anguished cries of people whose lives had been upended in the blink of an eye. The air was thick with dust, the sky clouded with the debris of civilization. Sarah's breath was ragged as she clutched her phone, eyes scanning the chaos around her. The news feeds were a blur of fire and panic, but there was one message that cut through the madness. Zacher fleet has arrived. The world had been invaded, and Earth was no longer the apex predator of its solar system. The shock quickly gave way to terror, and it wasn't just the violence of the invasion that rattled humanity's nerves. It was the complete and utter lack of warning. Earth had always imagined itself safe, isolated from the galactic wars of the universe, content to mind its own business, its blue skies and oceans serene and unthreatened. Now that illusion had shattered. Sarah scrambled to her feet, her mind racing. The same message popped up on her phone again, an encrypted channel from an unknown source. It was a desperate plea, not for help, but for understanding. Earth had miscalculated. They had underestimated their place in the universe. And now, they would pay the price. Colonel Roth, the message read, "We need you. The tech, the ancient tech, it's real. We're not the first ones they've come for. You need to act fast." Sarah didn't understand it. The ancient tech? She had read about it, of course. Rumors, conspiracy theories, suppressed reports from secret projects that dated back to the Cold War era. The idea that a civilization far more advanced than humanity had once walked Earth was something that most had written off as fantasy, dismissed by the world's governments as nonsense. But the message had no time for explanations. The tone was urgent, the clock ticking. Before Sarah Co. with algorithms. But this wasn't a problem that could be solved with logic. This was survival. In the shadows of that underground facility, amidst military-grade tech and the hum of battle readiness, Sarah felt a surge of dread, but also something else. Determination. Her fingers were trembling, but she didn't stop. If there was a way to stop the Zakar, this was it. It had to be. "You realize what we're doing, right?" she asked Roth, her voice barely above a whisper. "If we activate this tech, we might not just drive them off. We might set off something we can't control." Roth gave her a look that said everything. They had no choice. She glanced at the others in the room. Scientists, soldiers, engineers. All of them were looking to her for answers. The weight of it felt suffocating, but she took a deep breath, steeling herself. "We need to get to the primary energy core," Sarah finally said. "The one we uncovered 2 months ago. If we can reroute the power, we might be able to overload their ships." As Roth and his team geared up, Sarah's mind raced through every scenario. Each one, worse than the last. What if the tech malfunctioned? What if the power was too great? The very thought of humanity unleashing such power left a bitter taste in her mouth. But as Roth's words echoed in her mind, "We either use it or we die," she knew there was no turning back. The plan was set into motion. Sarah and Roth led the charge to infiltrate the Zakar's command center. They navigated the ruins of Earth's capital, could make sense of it all. The Zakar leader looked at her, a strange, bitter smile forming on its face. "You may have won this battle," it said, its voice full of venom. "But you have no idea what you've just unleashed." With that, the leader raised its arm one last time, and the remaining Zakar forces began to retreat, their ships pulling back into the distance. The battle was over, at least for now, but the victory was bittersweet. The galaxy had taken notice of Earth's defiance, and the Zakar leader's words echoed in Sarah's mind. "You have no idea what you've just unleashed." The aftermath of the battle felt surreal, as if reality itself had bent under the weight of what had just transpired. The energy pulse that had pierced the sky, the temporary defeat of the Zakar, the overwhelming sense that something enormous had shifted, it all seemed to hang in the air like a thick fog. Sarah stood amidst the wreckage of the underground chamber, surrounded by the scattered bodies of fallen soldiers, the echoes of their struggles still reverberating in her mind. The ground was scarred. Walls that had once been pristine and orderly now lay in ruin, their smooth surfaces cracked and scorched from the incredible blast. It was impossible to tell how many of the Zakar had retreated, but one thing was certain. Their initial onslaught had been halted, at least for now. Earth had bought itself a fragile reprieve. Roth was beside her, his face hard as ever, though his eyes held something deeper now, an unspoken understanding of just how close they had come to losing it all. He was silent for a moment before speaking, his voice carrying the weight of everything they'd fought for. "We've done it, Sarah. We held them off, but we both know this isn't over." She didn't answer immediately, her gaze drifting across the battlefield. The humans who had fought so fiercely, those who had survived, were regrouping, attending to the wounded, salvaging what little they could from the wreckage. But the truth hung in the air like the distant rumble of an approaching storm. The Zakar weren't just an alien species. They were a force to be reckoned with. And this war wasn't something that could be won in a single battle. Sarah turned to face Roth. "No, it's not over, but we've done something they never expected. We've made them bleed. Roth gave a grim nod. We've given humanity a chance to stand. But now we need to make sure we don't squander it. The battle they had just fought was only the first of many. Sarah knew that. The Zakar had already regrouped, their ships retreating into the black void of space. But they weren't running away. They were recalculating, reassessing, and when they returned, Earth would be ready for them. At least that was the hope. But they needed more than just technology, more than just a single pulse of energy to stop them. They needed strategy. They needed allies. They needed unity. Days passed in a blur of recovery efforts, briefings, and the scattered remnants of hope that had been ignited by the battle. The human resistance was small, but it was resilient. The global networks that had been fractured in the initial Zakar invasion slowly began to reconnect, as Earth's militaries and scientific communities joined forces, determined to find a way to adapt, to learn from the ancient tech that had now become their most precious asset. Sarah found herself working day and night, her mind constantly turning over the possibilities. She had spent most of her life solving problems, unraveling mysteries. This was no different. But this wasn't just any mystery. This was the fate of her species. We can't afford to sit back and wait for the next wave, Sarah said one evening, as she sat in a makeshift command center, surrounded by maps, holograms, and the hushed voices of officers coordinating the world's first true global defense. Roth stood beside her, looking out at the flickering lights of the facility, the air tense with urgency. You're right. The Zakar will be back. But we need time to figure out what we're dealing with, what their weaknesses are. Sarah shook her head, frustration rising in her chest. Time is something we don't have. We need to push them, find out what we can do with this tech. If it's not just a weapon, if it's a key. A key to what? Roth interrupted, his voice low and doubtful. A key to more destruction? Sarah's gaze snapped to him. A key to our survival, she said firmly. We can't just wait for them to come back. We need to take the fight to them or we'll be wiped out before we even know what hit us. The tension between them was palpable, but Roth didn't argue. He knew she was right. Humanity had no choice. The Zakar were not the first alien species to arrive on Earth with hostile intent, and they wouldn't be the last. But the message had been sent. The pulse that had shaken the very core of their world had been a beacon, a signal to other powers beyond the galaxy, beyond anything humanity could yet comprehend. The galaxy had seen them, and now they would have to deal with the consequences. Weeks turned into months, and slowly but surely, humanity began to adapt to the technology left behind by the Zakar. Scientists and engineers from around the globe worked tirelessly, studying the alien tech, trying to understand how it functioned, how it could be used not just as a weapon but as a tool, perhaps even a bridge to new alliances, to forces that could help them. Sarah spent long hours in the facility's deep labs poring over schematics, decoding alien language, and trying to make sense of the relics she had uncovered. The more she learned, the more she realized just how vast the unknowns were. The technology wasn't just advanced. It was unlike anything humanity had ever seen. It had the potential to unlock vast new frontiers in space exploration, in communication, in understanding the very fabric of reality itself. But that didn't ease her growing sense of dread. The Zakar had not been defeated, merely delayed. Their fleet still loomed on the edges of the galaxy, waiting for the right moment to return. And with the knowledge of humanity's potential now broadcast across the stars, the inevitable question lingered. Who else had noticed? Sarah, Roth's voice broke through her thoughts one day as she sat hunched over a holographic interface, the lines of alien text dancing in front of her. We're getting reports from the outer colonies. There's movement out there, on the edges of human space. Something is coming. Sarah straightened, her pulse quickening. She had known this moment would come. There would be no time to rest, no time to celebrate. The Zakar were only the beginning. Not just the Zakar, she murmured. The galaxy is waking up. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty, but one thing was clear. Earth was no longer a passive planet on the edge of the galaxy. They had proven themselves to be resourceful, to be dangerous, to have the will to fight. And now they were about to find out just how much of a target that made them. New fleets were being constructed, new weapons designed, and new alliances formed in the shadows. The pulse of humanity's defiance had sent ripples throughout the cosmos, and those ripples were beginning to reach distant stars. Earth was no longer an isolated world, but a fledgling power in a universe that had no mercy for the weak. Sarah stood in the observation deck of the new command facility, gazing out into the vast expanse of space. The stars blinked back at her, silent, distant, indifferent. But she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Humanity had earned its place in this galaxy, and whether they liked it or not, the galaxy was going to have to reckon with Earth. As Roth joined, her standing beside her at the window, she turned to him and smiled, grim but resolute. "We've taken our first steps," she said, her voice steady. "Now let's see who else is paying attention." The faint hum of machinery in the observation room was the only sound that filled the tense silence. Sarah stood motionless, her hands resting on the cold metal railing, her eyes fixed on the distant stars. There was a sense of finality in the air, but it wasn't the kind that promised peace. It was the kind that heralded something far more dangerous, the calm before the storm. The transmission that had arrived earlier was still fresh in her mind. An alien message, brief and chilling, transmitted from the vast reaches of space. It had been encrypted, untraceable by any of their known systems. And though they had deciphered the contents, the implications were clear. We are watching, and we are waiting. The message was no longer just a warning. It was a declaration, a challenge. Whoever had sent it, whoever was out there, had witnessed Earth's defiance, and now they were preparing for what would come next. Roth's voice broke the quiet, his tone as resolute as ever. "So what now?" Sarah turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Now we prepare," she said softly, but there was a steel in her voice that hadn't been there before. The war they'd fought had been just the beginning. The pulse of defiance they had sent out into the galaxy hadn't gone unnoticed, and now the universe was watching. Roth studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "They're not just watching, are they? They're waiting." She nodded slowly, her mind racing with possibilities. The message had been too cryptic, too calculated. It wasn't a threat, it was a test. The sender wanted to see how Earth would respond. Would they shrink back, crawl into a hole, and try to forget the taste of victory? Or would they step into the galaxy's larger, more dangerous arena and claim their place among the stars? "Whoever it is, they know exactly what we're capable of now," Sarah murmured. "We showed them that humanity can fight, can survive, but we're going to need more than just weapons. We'll need alliances, we'll need to understand this galaxy, and fast." The reality of the situation hit her with full force. The Zakar were only one species in a universe teeming with life. Life that, until now, humanity had only begun to comprehend. There were other powers out there, ancient forces with technology and knowledge far beyond what Earth had ever imagined. The challenge wasn't just about defeating the Zakar. It was about ensuring Earth's place in a galaxy that was vast, unknowable, and filled with dangers they hadn't even begun to understand. "Can we handle it?" Roth asked, his voice quieter now. There was a vulnerability in his question, something unspoken. It wasn't just about the planet's survival anymore. It was about their survival, about whether humanity was ready to stand in the face of something far bigger than itself. Sarah didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned back toward the window, her eyes scanning the stars once more. They had come so far. They had fought for their lives, for their future. They had proven that humanity, despite its imperfections, was resilient beyond measure, but that victory had come at a cost, and the real price of survival would come in the years to follow. "We will handle it," she said finally, her voice steady. "We have to." The days that followed were filled with a frantic rush to prepare. Earth's newfound defiance had sent ripples through the galaxy. But the ripples weren't just the result of the Zakar's retreat. There were others out there, others who had been watching and now they were drawing closer, their intentions unclear. The global defense forces began to unite under a single banner, pooling their resources in ways that were once thought impossible. Military leaders, scientists, engineers, and diplomats all worked in concert to forge a new era for humanity. But despite the unprecedented unity, there was no denying the uncertainty in the air. No one knew who or what would come next. The message had been a warning, but not one that offered any clarity about what lay ahead. It wasn't long before the first signs of movement in space were detected. Ships, too advanced for Earth's current technology to fully understand, were entering their orbit. They didn't speak, at least not in a language anyone could decipher, but their presence was enough to send shockwaves of fear and excitement throughout the human race. The message had been received. The galaxy was taking notice. Sarah found herself at the center of it all. As part of the newly formed Global Galactic Council, she was tasked with overseeing Earth's relations with the unknown entities that had begun to appear. Diplomacy would be key. But what did diplomacy even look like when the other parties involved could easily wipe humanity off the map with a single thought? What could they offer to negotiate? What could they hope to accomplish when the balance of power was so uneven? These were questions Sarah pondered as she stood before a new council of experts from around the globe. Some were hopeful, others fearful, but all were focused on one thing: survival. How could they turn Earth's defiance into something more? How could they use this moment, this opening, to ensure their place in a galaxy that had until now ignored them? The answer, Sarah realized, would come in the form of something even more powerful than military strength or advanced technology: unity. The nations of Earth, the disparate cultures, languages, and systems of governance, they would have to come together like never before. The very survival of their species depended on it. Humanity's been isolated for too long, she said, addressing the council. This is our chance to forge new paths, to find allies, to learn, to grow. But if we're going to do that, we have to put aside our differences. We have to present a united front to the galaxy. No one will take us seriously if we can't even trust each other. The room fell silent. Sarah could see the weight of her words sinking in. She wasn't just speaking to the council members in front of her. She was speaking to the world. This wasn't just about technology. It wasn't just about defense. It was about identity. Who were they as a species and what did they stand for? It was a question she hadn't fully realized needed to be asked until now. But the answer, Sarah knew, would shape humanity's future for generations to come. Far beyond Earth, across the stars, other civilizations had been watching. Some had seen the pulse of defiance from Earth and had reacted with curiosity. Others with disdain. And some were already planning their next move. On a barren, forgotten planet in the farthest reaches of the galaxy, an ancient race stirred. It had taken centuries, but they had finally awakened from their long slumber. They had felt the pulse, the shift in the cosmic balance, and they were not pleased. The message from Earth had not gone unnoticed by them, nor had it been forgotten. For them, humanity was an anomaly, a curious, dangerous species that threatened the delicate order they had maintained for eons. They had allowed the humans their moment of glory, their fleeting victory. But now the time had come to remind Earth of its place. The galaxy was vast, but it was not kind. And soon, Earth would learn that being noticed was not always a blessing. The stars above Earth flickered, alive with possibility and peril. Humanity had made its first mark in the universe. But the real question was this: would they be able to hold on to it, or would the galaxy prove to be far too unforgiving? The answers were out there, and Earth was ready to find them.